Abwak. The Abwak is a coordinated hunting Aswang variant known for attacking in teams rather than as a lone predator. Male Abwaks are said to transform into large, burrowing, reptile-like forms that move underground, waiting beneath victims before striking upward without warning. In their reptilian form, they move through hidden subterranean layers in complete silence, tracking footsteps and subtle pressure shifts above, positioning themselves directly under a target, waiting for the precise moment before erupting upward in a violent burst of earth, delivering a sudden, bone-crushing impact. Female Abwaks, meanwhile, are associated with aerial dominance. They appear as large raven-like figures. They circle above in slow, patient patterns, keeping pressure on the target's awareness while subtly guiding movement using sound and panic response. This creates a two-sided trap where escape is nearly impossible once the hunt begins, and that makes the Abwak especially disturbing. It has apparent intelligence and coordination. Instead of chaotic monster behavior you'd often see in lesser Aswang variants, the Abwak operates like a tactical hunting unit with defined roles, as seen in the 2011 film Aswang, which brought the Abwak to mainstream media. In other words, when you cross paths with the Abwak, escape is nothing but a distant dream, for beyond their orchestrated predation, they deliver death from below and above. The Magindara. The Magindara is a sea-dwelling Aswang variant rooted in Bicolano folklore, often associated with drownings, missing fishermen, and unexplained disappearances at sea. Unlike land-based Aswang that stalk villages or forests, the Magindara turns the ocean itself into a hunting ground, blurring the line between natural maritime danger and supernatural predation. Coastal communities believe that sudden storms, violent currents, and vanished boats can sometimes signal the presence of a Magindara, rather than an ordinary accident. They are commonly described as beautiful mermaid-like beings with the upper body of a woman and the tail of a colorful fish. Some myths say they are daughters or servants of the deity Aswang, and their greatest weapon is deception. You see, they use mesmerizing beauty and hauntingly beautiful singing voices to lure men farther into dangerous waters before drowning and devouring them. In fact, fishermen's stories often describe mysterious singing at night, or sightings of women near rocks and shorelines shortly before tragedy occurs. Despite their vicious nature, many traditions believe Magindara do not harm children because innocence and purity are considered poisonous to them. This belief appears in many Filipino supernatural traditions, where purity weakens malevolent entities. More than just a monster, the Magindara symbolizes the terror of the unknown depths, the idea that something beneath the water may already be watching, choosing who returns to shore and who disappears forever. The Gabunan. The Gabunan is regarded as one of the highest and most feared classifications of Aswang in Visayan and Mindanao folklore, often described not as a common predator, but as an apex entity within the supernatural hierarchy. Unlike lesser Aswang that focus solely on hunting humans, the Gabunan is also known to prey upon rival Aswang, eliminating weaker creatures to assert dominance and maintain control over feeding territories known as pugad. In many traditions, Gabunan is not merely the name of a species, but a title reserved for the oldest, strongest, and most cunning among Aswang clans, functioning almost like a chieftain or regional overlord that rules through fear and violence. Physically, the Gabunan is commonly described as a tall and humanoid, with coal-black skin, protruding fangs, bloodshot eyes, and long, disheveled white hair. It is said to possess immense physical strength and terrifying speed, moving so quickly that victims never realize it is nearby until it attacks. Gabunan can fly without wings, remain active during daylight, and do not rely heavily on animal shape-shifting like many other Aswang variants, reinforcing their reputation as ancient and perfected predators. Some stories also say the Gabunan favors stealth and deception rather than reckless slaughter. It often attacks by silently approaching victims before strangling them or snapping their necks with overwhelming force. One of its most feared behaviors involves kidnapping humans, especially infants, without anyone noticing. In several accounts, the Gabunan leaves behind substitutes such as piglets, fish, or wooden replicas concealed through illusion so that family members believe the victim is still alive. Some stories claim these false copies slowly weaken and die of illness, signaling that the real victim has finally been consumed elsewhere. Among its most unusual abilities is the use of the patadyong, a traditional loose skirt worn as a decoy. The Gabunan can cast an illusion onto the discarded cloth, making it appear alive and identical to the creature itself. Victims desperately grapple with what they believe is the real Gabunan, unaware that the slippery figure they are fighting is merely enchanted fabric. While the victim becomes exhausted or disoriented, the true Gabunan watches from nearby before suddenly seizing and carrying them away. This emphasis on trickery, psychological manipulation, and calculated hunting separates the Gabunan from more animalistic Aswang variants. Despite their brutality, folklore consistently portrays Gabunan as disciplined and highly selective hunters. Some traditions claim they consume human flesh only once or twice a year, suggesting that feeding is less about hunger and more about ritual, dominance, or maintaining power. Their abilities are also said to intensify during the full moon, further tying them to lunar cycles and supernatural authority. Because of their intelligence, anti-holy tactics, resistance to daylight, and command over lesser creatures, the Gabunan is often viewed as the closest thing the Aswang folklore has to a true king predator, an ancient entity feared not only by humans, but by monsters themselves. The Amomonggo. The Amomonggo is a hairy ape-like creature from Visayan folklore and Philippine cryptid tradition, most strongly associated with the forests and volcanic terrain surrounding Mount Canlaon in Negros Occidental. Its name is believed to originate from the Hiligaynon word amo, meaning ape or monkey, reflecting its simian appearance and animalistic behavior. Unlike many Aswang variants that disguise themselves as humans or rely on subtle deception, the Amomonggo is portrayed as openly feral and predatory, behaving more like a violent forest beast than a supernatural infiltrator. This distinction causes some communities to classify it less as a witch-like Aswang and more as a wild cryptid that exists deep within isolated wilderness. Descriptions of the Amomonggo are relatively consistent across accounts. It is usually depicted as a man-sized humanoid covered in thick hair, possessing massive hands, elongated arms, sharp claws, and an overwhelming physical presence. Some traditions describe it with pale or whitish fur, while others portray it as dark and mud-covered from constant movement through forests and caves. Several stories also attribute it with a long, powerful tail, linking it to similar simian giants in Manobo and Tagbanwa folklore known as Ikugan. These creatures are said to hang silently from trees or cliffs by their tails before ambushing victims from above. In certain accounts, they are even accompanied by hunting dogs trained to track humans deep in the wilderness. The Amomongo's attacks are usually described as extremely violent and animalistic. Rather than feeding discreetly like many Aswang, it is said to maul livestock, rip open carcasses, and consume entrails on the spot. Reports commonly involve deep claw wounds, shredded abdomens, and animals found partially disemboweled in remote farming areas. One of the most famous modern incidents occurred in June 2008 in La Castellana, where residents claimed a hairy ape-like creature attacked two men and slaughtered goats and chickens over the course of several nights. Medical records reportedly documented severe scratches across the victims' bodies, while witnesses described the attacker as a muscular, long-clawed creature standing around 5 feet tall. Though skeptics attributed the injuries to wild animals or hysteria, the incident reinforced the Amomongo's reputation within local folklore. The Harimodo. The Harimodo is an Aswang variant from Bicol and broader Philippine folklore that has fully abandoned human form, taking instead the shape of a massive, monstrous wild boar. Unlike other Aswang, such as the Bangkilan, that still retain partial human traits or disguises, the Harimodo is described as completely bestial, operating as a pure predator driven by instinct, speed, and overwhelming aggression. It moves through forests and rural wilderness with little restraint, embodying a form of Aswang that has lost all remaining human identity. One of its most defining and feared traits is its ability to transmit the Aswang condition through its saliva. According to folklore descriptions, any human who comes into contact with the Harimodon's saliva risks becoming an Aswang themselves, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as Yanggao sa Laway. This makes even a surviving encounter dangerous, as injury alone can lead to transformation rather than recovery. Because of this, the Harimodon is not only feared as a predator, but also as a carrier of contagion, turning violence into a mechanism for spreading its kind. Unlike stealth-based Aswang that rely on deception or infiltration, the Harimodo is associated with direct, overwhelming attacks in uncontrolled natural environments. Each attack carries the risk of expanding the curse beyond the initial encounter, allowing a single Harimodo to potentially trigger multiple transformations over time. This makes it especially feared in rural and forested regions, where isolation slows response and increases uncertainty, turning outbreaks of violence into something that feels self-propagating and difficult to contain. The Sigbin. The Sigbin is a nocturnal creature from Philippine Visayan and Mindanao folklore, widely classified within Aswang-related mythology, and described as a distorted, animal-like being resembling a hornless goat with unusually long limbs, a curved back, and a low-hanging head. One of its most distinctive behaviors is its inverted movement pattern, often said to walk backward while keeping its head lowered between its hind legs, while its long, whip-like tail and oversized ears contribute to its unsettling silhouette. It is also consistently associated with a strong, nauseating odor that signals its presence before any visual contact, making encounters dangerous even when the creature itself remains unseen. In folklore accounts, the Sigbin is a highly adaptive nocturnal predator that moves silently through rural and forested areas, preying on animals, corpses, crops, and sometimes humans. It is frequently described as extremely fast and capable of turning invisible, allowing it to approach settlements without detection. Some traditions also attribute to it the ability to suck blood or consume hearts, bones, and other remains, reinforcing its role as a scavenger-like predator that blurs the line between hunting and feeding on death. Reports of livestock disappearances and unexplained injuries are often linked to its presence in rural narratives. A central and recurring element in Sigbin lore is its association with Holy Week activity, during which it is believed to become more active and especially dangerous, with some stories claiming it targets children during this period. Folklore also describes the existence of Sigbinan families, individuals believed to keep Sigbin as controlled entities or familiar spirits. These creatures are said to be contained in jars or clay vessels filled with blood or animal remnants and used for protection, revenge, or wealth generation, depending on the narrative. In some versions, the Sigbin serves its keeper like a supernatural asset, but becomes dangerous if mistreated or starved, reflecting a fragile balance of control between human and creature. The Amaranhig. The Amaranhig, also called Maranhig or Amalanhig, is a corpse reanimation Aswang variant in Visayan folklore generally described as a reanimated dead body that continues to move after death due to unresolved circumstances or improper burial rites. It is typically not portrayed as a calculated predator, but as a wandering, mindless corpse-like entity tied to unfinished business, old curses, or ritual failure. Folklore descriptions commonly portray Amaranhig as visibly decayed or corpse-like, sometimes indistinguishable from a freshly deceased human, depending on how recently they have risen. They are often described with rotting flesh, exposed teeth, and stiff, unnatural movement that prevents smooth bending of limbs. A consistent trait across sources is the strong stench of decay that accompanies them, making their presence detectable before visual confirmation. In some traditions, they possess elongated fangs and a pointed tongue used for feeding, reinforcing their classification as both revenant and predatory Aswang type. There are variations in how Amaranhig behavior is interpreted. One tradition describes them as reanimated victims of violence or individuals with unresolved obligations, returning to pursue those connected to their death or unfinished purpose. Another classification links them specifically to deceased Aswang whose powers were not successfully transferred before death, causing the corpse itself to reanimate in a degraded but still dangerous form. Accounts also note that Amaranhig may exhibit mimicry behaviors, including the ability to repeat human voices or call out in familiar tones. Unlike other Aswang that actively hunt or deceive, the Amaranhig represents stagnation and repetition, an existence that continues without purpose, reminding communities that death does not always guarantee finality or peace. The Balbal. The Balbal is a corpse-feeding Aswang variant in Philippine folklore, often classified as a nocturnal ghoul that specifically targets the dead rather than the living. It is most commonly associated with wakes and fresh burials, where it is believed to detect human corpses through an exceptionally strong sense of smell, capable of tracking the scent of death from great distances. Because of this, it is said to arrive before burial rites are fully completed, making funerals a vulnerable moment where the boundary between respect for the dead and supernatural violation becomes fragile. Folklore consistently describes the Balbal as an airborne or gliding creature with bat-like movement, sometimes compared to a flying squirrel in the way it moves between rooftops and burial sites. It is depicted with hooked claws, fangs, and an unnaturally long, whip-like tongue used to lick or consume the flesh of corpses, often described as consuming the entire body, including skin, flesh, and bones. Its diet of decay is also said to give it a foul, rotting breath, reinforcing its association with death and decomposition. One of its most infamous traits is its method of corpse theft and deception. After consuming a body, the Balbal is said to replace it with a banana trunk shaped and magically altered to resemble the deceased, including outward appearance, in order to delay discovery by grieving families. This substitution ensures that burial rituals may continue without immediate suspicion, meaning the violation is only discovered after the funeral has concluded. In some traditions, the only clear sign of its presence is the absence of fingerprints or subtle inconsistencies in the replacement body. The Balbal is also strongly associated with structural intrusion behavior, often described as landing on thatched roofs and tearing through roofing materials or coffins using its curved claws to access corpses directly. Its movements are typically linked to silence and precision rather than aggression, Across folklore accounts, several protective measures are consistently mentioned, including bright light, loud noise, and the presence of certain plants such as sambong. Prompt burial is also emphasized as a practical safeguard, reducing the time window in which the Balbal can locate and disturb a corpse. In essence, the Balbal represents the violation of death's finality, an entity defined by absence, theft, and the unsettling idea that even the dead are not beyond predation.